Okay, so I stopped the taping for just a second, so I hope there's not any kind of a disruptive skip in it or anything like that. The third category that we're going to look at is binge eating disorders. So, where it differs from bulimia is that there's no purging involved, but there may be certainly plenty of diets. Um, and, it does have similar bulimia as the depression and kind of the self loathing, the self hatred that goes along with that. And again, with body weight, it could people could look very normal, just a little overweight, but certainly could be severely obese too. So just binge eating is simply um, periods of just uncontrolled eating well beyond when you should be satisfied or feeling satisfied. So I meant to mention with bulimia, but this is true, I think, too, of binge eating disorder, is that there are certain foods more than others that are really appealing, and for a number of reasons. It isn't just uncontrolled eating of just anything. Um, Oftentimes, it's really high caloric, high fat kinds of foods, and the part of the reason for that is fat feels good in your mouth. Fat has little round molecules that are hard to duplicate. So there's also a thing with texture and sensation in eating certain kinds of foods, like say ice cream or people. I had a relative who liked Wonder Bread as an example because it was just so kind of doughy. You could make a sandwich out of that and press it really flat, or you could make a little ball out of the bread, which was, very satisfying in its own way. And that's true of binge eating and bulimia. Hold on, let me see if there we go. So, symptoms of binge eating. Again, with the feeling of being unable to control what's going on, eating very rapidly, eating even when you're not hungry, eating in secret, avoiding situations where you aren't able to eat really the way that you might really like to. We see that in other disorders too, like alcoholism. People who are alcoholic don't always like going into social settings because they've got to work really hard at controlling their drinking rather than just drink the way that they really need to. A few more symptoms, which we've covered in some other parts of this, is the depression and anxiety and the need to keep it secret because of the shame that goes along with almost all eating disorders. Another handout for you to take a look at. Now, there are other kinds of eating disorders. We're not going to go into a lot of detail about it. Some of them are kind of peculiar. Let's see, I want to find the one. So one example is like night eating syndrome. It's where people get up at night and eat, and maybe eat quite a bit. It's an odd disorder that I don't think we understand perfectly well. People don't remember doing it. They get up the next day and there'll be an empty carton of ice cream sitting on the counter, or lots of bread missing, or that sort of thing. But there is obviously some kind of disorder going on, and something that really isn't easily explained by any other. So before leaving that, there's another one that I wanted to mention, which is pica, P-I-C-A. It's the eating of non-nutritious kinds of foods. So, for instance, eating paint chips or eating dirt, which is fairly common. There are some pregnant women where pica is common, but it's a thing that seems to disappear after giving birth. We see it in some children too with developmental disabilities, and it's a thing that has to be watched very, very closely, because some of this can be dangerous, can be bad for you, especially things like paint chips if they're the old-fashioned kind with lead in them and that kind of thing. There's also muscle dysphoria, and athletes are subject to some kind of odd disorders too, where they don't think they're big enough yet. They spend a lot of time looking in the mirror, which weightlifters do anyway. But these guys are looking because they just don't think that their muscles are really the size that they should be, and they need to work at it a little bit harder. If you've ever seen that video of the man whose biceps exploded, you should check that out. Whether or not he had this disorder, I think he kind of did, but he certainly paid the price for it. So you can look at some of these slides at the end here about the influences of eating disorder, the things that are risk factors. Low self-esteem, we've talked about most of these, lack of control, depression. So that's kind of the psychological end. The interpersonal has to do with relationships with family and friends. Two acquaintances or just people that you kind of know, little kids that are being teased or harassed, about their size or weight. There could be some form of abuse in the background too. Social factors are kind of an interesting discussion, and probably the most common thing that you'll hear discussed is the whole issue of Barbie, the doll Barbie, and whether or not that influences young girls and what they're supposed to look like, because in reality, if she were an actual woman, she'd be just out of proportion completely. It would be ridiculous. And you will notice that in the past, Mattel has changed their Barbies in the way that they look and added Barbies of color and all that kind of thing. But it's not just the Barbie thing. It's what we see in magazines and on television with models, with commercials. There is kind of a way of defining people who are actually beautiful. You'll notice that it's just been the last year or two where we've started to put heavier models, like in the swimsuit edition of Sports Illustrated. And for some reason, that just blew everybody's mind because maybe a heavier woman could look very sexy too. So yes, there are influences socially, but I don't think you can really just kind of grab one and say this is exactly it. I think it's a constant barrage of all of these unrealistic looks and expectations. So we're looking at biological causes, brain chemistry imbalance, that kind of thing. So go ahead and look at all of those. Hopefully this video wasn't too distracting or anything like that. Do me a favor, if you have questions about any of this, go ahead and contact me. We will have a test on some of this information, so be sure and take notes as you look over these slides and listen to the video. Okay? Good luck.